Everyone. Sorry for the late start here. Some exciting news at Materials Exchange. We have changed offices, which is fantastic. We have a wonderful new office. The challenge was getting the internet put in here. So we're getting internet tonight. And right now we're just running over my phone, which that actually that never ceases to amaze me how much internet and bandwidth you can get just through your mobile phone right now. It Yeah, I'm streaming 5G at 22 floors up in the downtown Chicago. Do you guys have 5G out there, Russ?
It's starting to. Yeah, yeah, starting to.
Excellent. All right, so today's Smart Market call, we have Russ Taylor with us, which is very exciting. Russ joined us, it must have been about 6 months ago.
I think
And
so. Yeah.
he's come back and he's got some great stuff to share. But before we do that, let's jump over to Ash and let's do a quick little recap. We had a very interesting market this week. Ash, what'd you see out there?
Yeah, Mike, joining Russ. I'll go through what I've got today, my little notes I've written down here. So the market started to move pretty good 2 weeks ago. It was actually pretty much starting to turn over to the downside. We had a situation with the logging in BC and all the conversation around there. Heavy rains came in, stopped some stuff shipping in the southern BC. West Fraser piled on with an announcement early this week. So, what I've seen from a lot of the framers, builders, buyers in the Midwest and east of the Mississippi, they came in a couple weeks earlier than normal to start building inventory again. The way they're covering their stuff is putting wood on the ground. Uh, I think we're having some inventory accumulation. Obviously, now here's the interesting thing: if you went back and looked at 2020 or 2020, almost to the week, same week, 2 to 3 weeks ago, where we just started bottoming and rallying them again. So, in everybody's mind, they always look at their past history. They look at these charts also, and they're like, "Damn, we've got to start buying some stuff." So that started happening. One of the interesting things, talking to a lot of the large chain yards, large framers, large truss plants, their plan, this is just their plan now. They're not going to build the same type size inventory, regardless of the price that they built last year. Literally, some of them were still trying to uh, get out of inventory that they had from this last move up 8 months ago, just a few weeks ago. So their whole purpose is we're going to build a 45 instead of a 90-day inventory. So that may temper things a little bit. But again, this is what people tell me. What they do are two different things. So what's going to happen? We probably will run up. People are covering stuff into December, and my guess is we'll see from there. I'm not in the business of making a call on where it's going. We can readjust at the end of December, but I think that's probably what people are building their inventory from. And again, our market is full of people that only want to talk about bullish things. We have to also know when things are going to roll over. So monitor that. I think supply are pretty well in check right now. The problem is the inventory is all sitting at the mill, unable to ship, and is trying to figure out how to squeeze through that tight pipeline. We'll eventually figure out. So I'll push it on to you and Mike. Are you and Russ, Mike?
All right, Ash. Yeah, great. That was awesome. One of the things I'm sensing in the market is as the prices move so much higher, they perpetuate them moving higher as guys buy in just because they've moved past the margin that they planned on having. Um, this could be, a little bit of a tulip rally, but I'm I'm like Ash. I'm not going to make a real call. I don't have a position in the market, so it doesn't make a difference for me. All right, let's move on to Russ Taylor. Who are you, Russ Taylor? Tell us all about yourself.
Well, I'm right now doing my own business, Russ Taylor Global. But of course, I ran International Wood Markets Group for 28 years before that, and that's my bio, I guess. So that's where I finished up with that, and now I'm back, sort of doing more consulting and analysis. So looking ahead to see what's going on in world markets, and lots going on as usual. So as there is in the U.S.
So 45 years in the wood products industry. Uh, Before we get going, what do you think? What's something that has absolutely stayed the same, and what's something that's just changed dramatically in those 45 years?
Well, I was in lumber sales, worked for Interfor back in the 80s, and the sales methods haven't changed that much. The telephone, except MaterialsXchange, that's the
Well,
only big difference. So I mean, that's where I guess in our business, it is a personal business, but and the phone calls help. But these days with COVID, you have to look at other options. So the electronic medium is another interesting development going forward. So it's technology, I suppose, that's the big changer, right? The big game changer in our industry.
Yeah, well, and the thing I find so fascinating is 2x4s are still 2 inches by 4 inches, or the notional value. For the last 45 years, that the product itself hasn't really changed much.
Yeah, exactly. We're still building houses almost the same way we did 100 years ago. So it's changing slowly, but because we have to, don't have the labor, so we're looking more at off-site construction and prefab housing, wall frames and trusses and so forth. But that's changing slowly too.
Now, in your world travels, do you see styles of building that may see overseas coming to the U.S. more now?
I mean, the manufactured housing is sort of a little more developed in Europe, but still, they're still building houses, stick frame building with houses in Europe. So it's more about building with other materials, though. They build, with brick and concrete and so forth as well. So they wood frame construction is quite small in Europe. Maybe 20% of all houses, and depends on the country. So most of the houses, though, are stone or brick or something different.
Interesting. All right. Well, let's jump into the topic at hand, which is you just put out an article, and this article laid out the top lumber companies in the world, essentially. So, how did this article come to be?
Well, I've been doing it for about 30 years, so it's so it's kind of something I do, and I've done it before, and so I guess I was just working on another project and had to do an update, and then from there I kind of made more updates. So I just decided to put it out there. I hadn't seen the list for a while, and with all the bigger acquisitions going on, I've tried to update it. This first chart is just showing the U.S. and Canadian companies, what I call the companies over like 1 billion board feet, and there's 13 on the list. This is capacity. Production's a little bit less, but you can see the usual culprits are still up there. West Fraser, Canfor, Weyerhaeuser, Interfor, Sierra Pacific. That top 5 list hasn't changed for a long time. Even the next list hasn't changed that much either. Everyone's jockeying a little bit. GP's selling a few mills, Interfor is buying a lot more mills, and so that's how the scale is. But all the big guys are getting bigger recently. In the last year or so, all companies have either bought companies or built mills, so they're all getting bigger. That's the story. And the new entry, I guess, is Green First. They purchased the assets of Rainier AM, and plus they had another mill, so their capacity is now just over 1 billion board feet. So again, we haven't had 13 mills on the list we've been doing for a long time. So it's finally getting there as some of the smaller companies are getting bigger and more acquisitions and so forth. So, and again, the last thing is just to say that these companies, what is it? 8 of them have mills in both U.S. and Canada. So that's a big change from, say, 15, 20 years ago, where it was strictly U.S. companies and Canadian companies, and now it's a North American business.
Yeah, it's when I take a look at the list, what I notice is all top 13 have a U.S. presence, but there's some
Correct.
gaps over on the Canadian side.
Yeah, a lot of the companies a lot of the American companies have stayed in the U.S. and decided to, keep it simple, and then Canadian companies have been sort of moving into the U.S. is more what's been happening. So that's the story here. And if you go back about 30, 40 years ago, a lot of the American companies were up in Canada. Rainier had mills, and Georgia Pacific, no, but some of the other companies had some mills as well, but now they're sticking to the U.S. business only, so that makes sense.
It does. Well, and it's a fiber or a log play. Where the logs are at, the least expensive logs is in the U.S. South, correct?
Correct. Absolutely. And the only real wood basket left to expand on, and so that's been pretty obvious for the last 10 years. That's where all the investments have gone, and almost no investments elsewhere in North America. A couple here and there, but that's about it. And lots of improvements and upgrades, but not new mills because the fiber is so scarce.
So, as a consumer of lumber in the United States, you know, what does this tell you? Obviously, it looks like the U.S. is producing almost double what Canada's producing right now.
That's on this list. The actual difference is quite a bit less. It's about I think it's about I can't remember now off the top of my head, but 25 billion board feet in Canada and 35 in the U.S. But it's
Oh, okay.
that the gap's widening. The gap was quite narrow a few years ago, only about 3 or 4 billion board feet difference. But now with the reductions in BC and the growth in the U.S. South, it's skewing. I mean, all the growth is coming out of the U.S. South in North America. That's the story.
What about the Pacific Northwest? Because that type of wood is more similar to the Canadian wood. Are they growing up there, or is that staying about the same?
Yeah, they're constrained. They're constrained by the volume of wood, and it's not really the same as Canada at all. Canada is mainly an SPF sector across Canada. The U.S. Pacific Northwest is more Douglas fir, hemlock, and so forth. And yes, I see. Sorry, you are right about the 23 billion versus 36 billion in 2020
Oh, the total
21
production. Yeah.
capacity. Yeah, you are right. Oh no, sorry, that's the 2020 production level. So yeah, the difference is much bigger already than what I thought. Yeah.
And yeah, it's amazing. The big top 13, make up 2/3 of the U.S. and 60% of the Canadian production. So the big are big, and they dominate that market. All right, let's jump to the next one. Mega companies. So the top 12 global lumber companies.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so now there's some names on here which may or may not be familiar to someone. So let's.
Yeah, so exactly. So eight from the previous list, eight now make this threshold. It's about 1.25 billion board feet, or really to compare apples and apples or apples and oranges, you got to use cubic meters. So I've used cubic meters to be able to compare them. So now you've got a couple of entries from outside of North America. Stora Enso has been a steady player in the business. They've always been in our list in the top 10 sort of thing. And so there they are. They're in the top six with their mills all over Europe. They operate in like 9 countries in Europe, plus two mills in Russia. So they're all over the place in Europe. But they're a big player and a big exporter. Some of their wood goes to export markets as well. And the other perennial sort of one that makes our list is number 11, Arauco out of Chile. They've been steady in over the years with their production, going and then exporting to many markets. But the
Now
new
I know
entrant,
them.
oh,
I know
go
them as
ahead.
a panel mill, but what is the product in lumber that they're producing?
They make radiata pine lumber out of their operations. A lot of that is not structural. It's all either it goes for doors and windows and molding stock typically, and a lot of low grade, pallet lumber and that sort of thing. But no structural lumber. The wood is not really strong enough to meet great U.S. grading standards,
Okay.
or they get too much fall down if they try and make it. So they stick to what I call non-structural applications.
Now, who is? Am I gonna say it right? Segeza. How do you
Yeah,
say that?
Giza Group. Yeah, they're a new. I mean, they've been around for a little while. They've been buying up mills, and then more recently they bought 2 companies in Siberia. One was a big company, and one was a smaller company. But they've really grown quickly, and all of a sudden they're a big player. And so I've actually been to one of their mills in Siberia that they owned, or at least at the time, and then I've also seen 3 of the other mills they've acquired. So they're all those are good mills. I mean, you don't think of Russian mills maybe as being all that state of the art, but three of the mills I've seen in that of the mills that they own are very much state of the art and very well managed companies. So yeah, they're a force to be reckoned with now, and they're also building, I think, one of the first pulp mills in Russia in over 40 years. That's a big investment.
Okay.
A lot of risk, and also they have other products as well. They're planning a CLT mill and other products as well. So they're a real player.
And do you foresee their product getting to North America, or is that going to stay in the Euro-Asia region?
Yeah, well, most Russian mills really get probably good enough return selling into the European market or even the China market, some of the Middle East markets. But companies these scale, they realize that there's a lot better markets out there, and they can now go after them. So I think we'll definitely see some of their lumber coming into more export markets, including the U.S., depending on what they decide is the best option for them. And it's complicated because you've got your mill, and one of the limitations for mills in Europe is planers. There's not a lot of planer operations necessarily at mills. A lot of the business in Europe is rough sawn. So the German mills, when they expanded back in the 1990s, they built world-class planers, so they've got huge planing capacity. But other countries, like say Finland, they've actually been almost eliminating planer capacity, so they can't enter markets like the U.S. as easily. And then Russia, the question is, do they have planers or not? Because if you haven't got a planer, it's more, you can't access the commodity business or the board business. You have to do something else. So that's probably better suited elsewhere in other markets. So that's one of the factors.
All right. So this is probably the big topic at hand. Europe's share of the U.S. lumber import increases. So
Yeah, and this just exactly, this is kind of what's the trend is. And the graph on the upper right is just the U.S. imports. It's mainly blue. That's the Canadian imports, but of course you can see it's been declining the last 5 years because of a lower production in BC and flat production more or less in the rest of Canada, and so it's not growing. And imports aren't growing, except from Europe, and that's the lower left-hand graph where it just shows the trend in the European countries, how they've been growing. And they peaked in the last decade, during as the housing market took off, but the same players aren't there. So this cycle we haven't seen as many Europeans come in, especially Germans, but and prices have been good elsewhere as well. So we're seeing a steady growth, and so far this year as well, growing as well, but it did slow down in the third quarter. So it won't be quite as high. It'll be a little bit higher than the 2020 mark, 5.5 million cubic meters perhaps by the time the smoke clears. So so my sense is that next year, with looking at U.S. demand and overall production levels, we're going to need at least that level of production or imports from Europe, and maybe more depending how the market plays out.
This chart amazes me. The softwood lumber imports into the U.S. I mean, Canada was so dominant in the early part of this century, and I mean they've just really fallen off. I mean, from their peak of what is this 50 million cubic meters in '05, down to where are we at here? That we're half of that, under half that.
It dropped dramatically. That's right. That's a big function of the BC mills closing. 35 BC interior mills, or was it 40 mills closed since 2005 from the mountain pine beetle. and little growth in the rest of Canada, and so that's the result. And also the other thing we always forget about is Canadian consumption has been growing. So we need more of that wood stays in Canada, less is available for all export markets, including the U.S. So a big change there for sure.
And I mean, there's a factor going on that the European wood's coming over here. What's the story on their fiber base?
Well, the fiber base is well, it's ample if you're in Germany because of this. They have a massive spruce bark beetle outbreak, and in the Czech Republic as well, parts of Austria, a little bit in Sweden as well. I mean, it's heavily focused on Germany and the Czech Republic, and so that's created extra cheap logs and lots more logs. So they've been able to process these logs very inexpensively and export to all markets of the world. But more recently, that's changed. Now that supply is tightened up. In fact, log prices now are kind of back where they were. It's 100 euros a cubic meter, so $115 a cubic meter. That's expensive logs, and so they're now not as competitive as they used to be. But going forward with the as in any beetle outbreak, you produce lots while it's available, and then you have less. So there's going to be a bunch of mill closures coming up in Europe, Central Europe, in the next 5-10 years, that sort of thing, as we saw in British Columbia. We'll see.
I was gonna say, is that story gonna be kind of the same? So if we look at BC, '05, now granted, '07, '08, '09 was our housing crisis, but you could kind of trend it lower in 10 years. Maybe we don't see these European mills here.
Yeah, I mean, you won't maybe see as many, but you'll still see the Europeans coming because they've got the manufacturing and the supply chain built. So maybe just not quite as much.
All right. So what's the chart we're looking at here?
Well, this graph's just to show that the Europeans have other markets besides the U.S. to look at. That the blue line is the SPF prices that we all saw this year, and going backwards. But the orange line is the Swedish carcassing price delivered to the UK. So you can see that so sometimes the U.S. prices going back in time, U.S. prices are a little bit higher, but not a lot higher. But it's only in the last year and a half where prices were really that much better than the UK. And then, of course, when you have a correction, UK prices kept going up. That's why we saw, especially a lot of Swedish volume drop in third quarter, because the UK prices were still very strong and US prices were not very good. So, but they have other markets they can go after. That's the point. So they can chase the US market for a while, but then they have to look in the rearview mirror and make sure they don't lose their existing customers. And that's what happened. They switched over, and now they're probably going to start switching back. The UK is starting to ease off, and the U.S. market's coming back. So all of a sudden, it's what do you do for next year, right? Big question marks.
Yeah, for sure. That's interesting. The swing factor in the markets these days really is the offshore market. So it's important to understand what's happening in other accessible markets to that particular piece of wood. And obviously, in Sweden, to get anywhere, it's going to go on a vessel. And once it gets on the water, it can go to UK, it can go to South America, the Middle East, or United States.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what they do. They try and figure out where's the best market returns, and they do it on more of a quarterly basis. Exactly.
All right. This is the big one. Top 26 producers nation or in the world.
Yeah, exactly. That's my top 26 list, and the first 12 we've already seen. So the part on the right starts with number 12, and then it just goes down to number 26. So these are all the other companies we haven't talked about yet, and again, it's a lot of of that 14, eight are from Europe, one's from Russia, so only 5 from North America. So there are a lot of companies getting bigger and entering the fray, so to speak. And a lot of these companies, and the other thing too on this list of 26 companies, I've been to all these companies and I've seen mills at all of these companies. It's not like It's not just a list that I've put together. This is a list of companies that I know, and unlike other lists that are just a list, it's data. I kind of know these companies, and I've visited all these companies at some point in time. But the Europeans more recently, and probably the North Americans less recently. But I have a feel for all these companies as well, and a lot of them are very well positioned in domestic markets and also in export markets, and they're very strategic. So I think we'll see a lot more of some of these European companies that some of the names maybe you haven't heard of, and some you probably have, depending if you're in the trade or not. So, but yeah,
Yeah,
a
interesting.
lot of players.
Well, I know, and Ilum Timber, the number 26, they have assets in Germany now, of course.
Yeah, they actually have the largest, I would call it the largest mill in the world. That's one of the ex Klausner mills that they purchased. And so they have two mills in Germany and then one mill in Russia. So that gets them up the list as
Excellent.
well.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
names that I'm not familiar with on here. Rettenmeyer and Molivin. Yeah, I'm not familiar with those. That's interesting.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many of these are in the U.S. market. I'm pretty sure Molven is, because I know one of the traders that does that, but I'm not sure about Rettenmeyer. But again, depends if they have planers or not. A lot of them, some of the companies don't have planers or have small planers, not so competitive, maybe going to the U.S. market. But a lot of the big German companies like number 14 Pfeiffer and 15, which is Schweighofer, maybe that's the name you know better. They've got big mills with big planers, Meyer Melnoff as well. So they have the ability to come into the U.S. market with sort of the type of mills and economies of scale.
That's interesting. I guess I hadn't realized that the capacity, the ability to plane is an important factor in obviously if they can come to the United States or not. All right, so now we're going to
Yeah.
look here at the top 20 in Europe.
And that's sort of my last list. This isn't not my list to share. I've used some of the information from that report. They have all the details, for production and so forth. But I thought I would just share that list as well, just so you can see who's beyond the list, beyond that number 11. I guess number 12 Ilum sort of thing. But there's other companies on the list as well. More names you won't be familiar with at all. So, but again, small but still relatively big. And number 19 BSW was just purchased by Binderholz, and so again, they're getting bigger as well. But a lot of these companies on this list, I have not visited two of these companies, just so you know. The other 18 I have visited at some point and know them. So they're all a lot of them are private companies as well, not the corporates, and they're a little more cautious in some ways, but move fast when they have to.
Sure. So, I think there's an overall theme here. And that, in my opinion, is don't be surprised if you don't recognize the paper wrap on a bunk of lumber that shows up at your facility.
Exactly.
And the game is changing. Talking about the U.S. South, there's several greenfield mills popping up that are not being built by built by outside interests that are going to have different names. They're not going to be a West Fraser, Canfor, Weyerhaeuser, GP. So don't be surprised, I guess, is when some new wood shows up in your yard. And probably the biggest advice you could get is look at your operations and see where you can become flexible, because if you're dependent on Canadian SPF, that's not the biggest player in the game anymore.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The imports, the imports can play a bigger role. They have a lot more logistics costs getting it to market. But historically, getting wood from BC to Florida was the same as getting it from Europe to Florida by ocean. Not so much today with the higher freight rates. But nevertheless, those should return closer to normal, I hope, over time. And the other thing is, some of these mills in Europe are realizing that, like BC, they're running out of timber with their bark beetle problem. And where else do we grow our business? So I think you'll see some of these companies showing up in North America, like we've seen Binderholz. They have the two ex-Klausner mills, but who's next?
Sure.
I think that's possible.
We had one question. Judy Johnson asked, what does Russ see happening with the new BC restrictions coming our way?
Well, that's getting back to this whole. We've had like forest policy changes left, right, and center from the government, starting with the uh, old growth timber, and which is probably the big one that's going to affect the timber supply, and then changing the how the forest licenses, who's got the forest licenses, but it's going to be less volume available for the industry, and we in combination with other factors that are already in play, like the last of the mountain pine beetle and more beetles showing up, Douglas fir and spruce bark beetles, and we have to protect caribou habitat, that sort of thing. So in the interior, I think I work with some guys that do some great modeling, and they're suggesting perhaps 5-6 mills will close in the BC interior, not right away, because these restrictions are sort of have a 2-year window before they're going to go into effect. Like they're you can't log them now, but they may come back. But nevertheless, looking ahead, I think we'll see some closures, and we've also said that you're going to see a couple of pulp mills impacted. Well, one was announced this week; it's closing already, and Powell River. The mill there is going to be closing, and that's one of the oldest mills in the world, 120 years, or 1920s mill, but with upgrades, but newsprint mill. So that was inevitable, but tied to the fiber supply and other issues, costs, it's shutting down. And on the BC coast, we'll see a number of smaller mills close, especially those cutting old growth cedar, fir, and hemlock. We'll see some smaller mills closing there. So again, we'll see another round of mill closures over time. Over the next 5 years, 5 to maybe 6 years, we'll start to see a lot of mills closing there as well. So it'll be a smaller industry again, from government policy initiatives and some of the things like caribou habitat protection that will be implemented at the same time.
So the bottom line is, it's a challenging environment for BC. It's a inviting environment for southern U.S. Europe, the logs were cheap. They've kind of normalized, but we see some growth in Europe. We obviously see growth in southern U.S. Russ, thanks. I think we should check back in another 6 months, see what your worldly travels have shown you. But if anyone wants to get in touch with Russ, you can find him online, Russ Taylor Global. His website is russtaylorglobal.com. In 45 years, I'm sure you've learned a thing or two, and you'd probably, if you got some questions, I bet Russ, if he doesn't have the answer, he knows where to get it.
Yep, absolutely. And I expect you never stop learning in this game, because things keep changing, and I'm learning every day. So I don't stop.
Excellent. All right, everyone. Have a safe holiday or a safe weekend. Hope you enjoyed your holidays. We'll be back next week. Next week, we're gonna switch it up a little bit. We're gonna go look at the hardwood lumber market and how that could affect construction. So next week, we're shifting to hardwoods. Russ, thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.